This video series is going to be about all things skill points, but first, a word of warning. Skill points are not the end-all be-all of EVE. Don't get me wrong, they do influence ISK per hour and PvP outcomes, but there are no prerequisites for fun. So, don't get too hung up on them, and try not to burn yourself out. Think sustainability. Start by setting goals that require a modest time investment, and then scale up if you found that you set your sights too low or as your income increases. Trust me on this. Just because it is doable, that doesn't mean that you're going to want to do it for months on end. Second, the scope of this project ended up getting rather big. I kept things from getting too out of hand by assuming a certain base level of knowledge. Of course, I probably do spend more time explaining certain stuff than I need to, but I'm not going to be breaking it down Barney style for the newest of new bros. So, if you've been playing for at least a couple months, you should be able to follow this series without much problem. Less than that, however, and you might need to supplement this with a few Google searches. Alright, let's get started. This chart indicates players gain about 17 million SP a year. Of course, I don't know where CCP got that number from. Like, was it an average, an estimate? Does it include players whose subscriptions have lapsed? And so on. But I consider 17 mil to be well below the bar. With +3 implants, no remaps, and a year-long Omega subscription, you can train 18.1 million SP a year. Thus, I assert that that is actually the bare minimum of SP that you should be training, as it requires virtually zero effort and ISK to do. Of course, this series intends to help you do much better than that, but first, let's take a broad look at all the different SP sources. Because of all the variables involved, it is difficult to estimate just how much mileage you get out of some of these sources. However, this does represent a reasonable estimate. Regardless, you should be able to see that things like remaps, implants, and cerebral accelerators all make a huge difference over the long term. And then we have the big one. Running a single skill point farm character can net you somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 million SP a year. Moreover, that SP is unallocated, allowing you to dump that into skills that you aren't mapped for. Of course, this isn't all of the relevant information, is it? Because we haven't considered the ISK cost for this SP. Once again, there are numerous variables involved, but this will give you a ballpark estimate of the ISK to SP ratio of various sources. And do note that this holds true whether you're paying for it or not. For example, you may collect cerebral accelerators yourself from live events, but it still costs you time to collect them, and this is time that you could spend doing something else, like ISK grinding. In the business world, this is known as an opportunity cost. So, whether you're paying in ISK or time, you should always factor in all of your costs. Regardless, this slide should help illustrate a few things. First, the ISK per SP cost for implants is so low, they might as well be free. Obviously, if you're planning on doing some PvP in a space with warp interdiction bubbles, you might want to consider rolling with the clean clone. But other than that, it doesn't really matter where you live or how much you're making, you should be rolling with at least a pair of +3s in your head at pretty much all times. Also, some of you may have noticed that there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between running an SP farm and buying an equivalent amount of injectors off the market. But remember that when the costs are multiplied by tens of millions of SP, the savings will reach billions of ISK. Moreover, I also made a rather unoptimized price estimate of the SP farm, so if you're patient and plan ahead, you can bring that cost down considerably. But on top of all of that, injectors help negate the drawbacks of a neural remap. So we really should consider the cost of a remap plus skill injectors or an SP farm to see what our final cost would be. For those that don't know, remaps ostensibly cost nothing, but remapping for certain skills results in others training more slowly. This means that you'll either have to hold off on training non-map skills, train them at a significantly reduced rate, or resort to skill injectors to work them. So, one way or another, there is a cost involved. But, like I said, skill injectors help offset that cost. Thus, if we're going to remap, we're probably going to want to supplement that with skill injectors, and if we're going to run an SP farm for self-injection, we absolutely should remap. But yeah, long story short, we really should consider the ISK per SP cost of SP farms and skill injectors combined with remaps. Alright, that's a little better. 1500 ISK per SP is still a little high, but once again, I will cover ways to bring that down further. In summation, there's lots of options available to players that require varying amounts of time and effort, and that award varying amounts of SP. Mix and match to suit your needs, or combine them all to greatly accelerate your skill training. And just to give you guys an idea of what is possible, I'm getting ready to finish about a 45 million SP year for one of my characters. And do note that I lost a considerable amount of SP due to injector penalties. I have 3 other characters who haven't exactly had bad years, and I haven't even been playing that much. For real, I spent a lot of time making videos this year, and even found time to play some other games. So you don't have to be space rich or a hardcore player who puts in 40 plus hours a week in order to make gains. If you're willing to put in a little bit of time and effort, you can increase your gains and pull ahead of the power curve for your age. Alright, I'm going to finish this video by spending way too much time talking about progression, but expect these other subjects to follow in their own videos. And since I've already done all of my pre-production work for them, I should be able to get them out in a reasonable time frame. Okay, let's talk about the 80-20 rule. For those that don't know, the amount of SP required to train each rank of a skill increases exponentially. So the amount of time it takes to train a skill from 0 to level 4 is only about 17.7% of the time it would take to train that skill all the way up to 5. Naturally, training the skill to 4 gives you 80% of the total benefit you would get if you had maxed the skill out. Thus, that's where the 80-20 rule comes from. Well, technically it's the 80-17.7 rule, but that doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. Regardless, in order to get the biggest benefit for the shortest amount of training time, we typically only want to train a skill to 4. We can always come back later and train it to 5 after we start running out of stuff to train to 4. Of course, it wouldn't be Eve without exceptions. So, first off, T2 ships, T2 guns, and a few modules require certain skills to 5. Such equipment is usually quite powerful, so it's often worthwhile to go ahead and train the relevant skills to 5. Not only do we get the benefits of a maxed out skill, but we also unlock some powerful equipment as well. Other skills that are usually worthwhile are those that are low rank but apply to a wide range of ships. For example, spaceship command, navigation, and evasive maneuvering are all either rank 1 or 2 skills, and they affect the performance of every ship in the game. And for those that don't know, a skill's rank is nothing more than a multiplier, so while a rank 1 skill would take 256,000 SP to max out, a rank 2 skill would take 512. Finally, certain skills tend to make unexpectedly large differences in ISK efficiency and/or PvP outcomes. For example, you'd think that training logistics cruisers from 4 to 5 would provide a rather linear increase in performance, but it actually makes a world of difference to Warp to Me's basilisks. And that's because a BASI pilot with Logistics 5 only needs 1 cap transfer to remain cap stable, thus freeing up a remote capacitor transfer to deal with the tuning nuke pressure. So, if you ever hear an FC asking his Logi commander about combat caps, this is what he's talking about. And of course, not having enough combat caps means waiting while they sort out the problem, or perhaps even having to stand the fleet down. In short, it's kind of important. Anyway, Extra Credits has a video about these unexpectedly large differences in power, which they call breakpoints. They talk about it from the perspective of a game dev, but they probably do a better job explaining it than I do. Plus, it's rather interesting, so I highly recommend you check it out. So in review, we typically want to train skills to 4 as a new bro, and then go back later to train them to 5. Exceptions include when the skill unlocks new equipment, applies to a wide range of ships, and/or creates breakpoints. And of course, if they can do more than one of these things, then we should do them a lot sooner. Oh, and yeah, also note that ship skills give really large bonuses, but only to a relatively narrow range of ships, so we need to be sure to factor this into our decision-making process as well. And yeah, it isn't always easy to see where breakpoints are, but sometimes you can spot them in Pythia. For example, you may notice that training Evasive Maneuvering 5 will allow your interceptor to achieve a 2-second align time. Or training Power Grid Management 5 will allow you to swap a fitting mod for a second gyro stabilizer. Okay, that's great and all, but what exactly should we be training? Well, skill requirements, varying amounts of skill overlap, and the monster level 5 trains for T2 ships tend to corral players down a path similar to this. And it's fine. It's fine for players who aren't quite sure exactly what they want or what the various ship classes are capable of. Of course, if you do know what you want, such as running incursions in a Vindicator or mining in a Rourke, then go for it. But if you're not sure what you want, then this is fine. Regardless, new bros should start out with what I call the Enchanted 12. Have you never heard of that before? Well, that's because I cut 2 targeting skills off of the Magic 14 to create my list. Not only do the targeting skills not benefit haulers and travel fits, but they're just not as critical as the other skills. Don't get me wrong, they're still important, but they don't have the enormous impact that these other skills have. Thus, their presence on the Magic 14 annoys me, and I made my own list. But I digress. The Enchanted 12 pretty much apply to every ship you'll ever fly in EVE, have a large impact on ship performance, and are relatively fast trains. Oh, and they also tend to be prerequisites for other skills and or important equipment. Moreover, new bros won't always know exactly what they want to do or what they should be training for, so these skills provide a good base that they can't go wrong with. They're never going to wish that they hadn't trained them or want to extract them. After that, players should start heavily working tanking and other support skills. There are a laundry list of them, and I don't want to go through them all. Suffice it to say, they include everything listed on EVE University's wiki page on the subject, plus targeting and damage application skills. Oh, and explorers will want to work in their scanning skills, while miners will want to swap gun and missile skills for harvesting and reprocessing. And industrialists are just going to be OFP. They have multiple years of science and industry skills to train, so they're not even going to want to mess with this. After that, you'll want to progress up the ship tree. Players typically spend a little time on each step working support skills and unlocking T2 guns before they start wishing they had something more powerful. Regardless, try to make vertical upgrades by moving up the tree and not lateral upgrades by cross-training for other races. Yes, there are powerful ships scattered about the other races' lineups, but you're going to get far more bang for your training time by unlocking entirely new ship classes. Don't worry, you can and should cross-train for the other races later. And real quick, any new bros that may be watching this should pick whatever's race whose avatar they like the best. It will affect your starting skills, but by a negligible amount. Thus, the more important question is what race to train first. If you already know what you want, by all means go for it. However, if you're unsure what you should pick, go with Gallente. Of course, they have plenty of excellent ships in their lineup, but so do all the races, so don't freak out if you've already started training something else. Regardless, Gallente has a few other things going for them that help to edge out the other races. So, they do incredible amounts of damage up close, they are usually able to be armor or shield tanked, and they have excellent skill overlap with all the pirate ships. Their biggest downside is that you will have to train hybrid weapons and drones to be able to get the most out of your ships, while the other races tend to be able to kick the drone can down the road a little bit. As for the other races, I'd probably go with Caldari second. I do consider them to be a little bit more new bro friendly, and they also have some excellent holes and a good overlap with the pirate ships. But, like I was saying before I went off on a 500-word tangent, you'll generally want to move up the ship tree for a particular race, branching out into faction into T2 ships along the way. The when and what of which will greatly depend on things like whether this is a PvP or PvE character and on what your career is. Typically, however, one of the first T2 ships people train for is a Travel Scepter, followed by the other T2 frigates. Past that, people usually start investing heavily in T2 ships before moving on to caps, and that's because they're mostly cheaper and with a shorter terrain. Once you've done all of that, then you can start to diversify your hangar with ships from other races. And so, this is what I mean by up and out. Of course, sticking to this plan isn't always easy when your corp has doctrine ships of various races that they want you to fly, but generally speaking, you'll want to move up before diversifying. Oh, and I suppose I should mention it now, I highly recommend that you make at least 2 characters. Like, if you think you like the game and feel comfortable ponying up for a subscription, just go ahead and make it 2. Make 1 PvE and 1 PvP character. It will allow your ISK-making toon to concentrate on upping his ISK efficiency, while your PvP character can focus on his combat effectiveness. Plus, having 2 characters is useful for all sorts of other stuff, like scouting, cynos, hauling, and dual boxing. So, as soon as you realize EVE has its hooks in you, go ahead and create a second account and pay for 2 subscriptions. Trust me, you're gonna want it. Finally, you'll want to polish your skills. That means training all your support tanking, damage, and damage application skills to 5. Having all that stuff to 4 will only put you on par with the average player. Training it to 5, however, will give you a leg up on the average bro and put you on equal footing with the vets. Also, Do note that there are no clear delineations between these steps. There will be a fuzzy overlap. For example, you don't have to train the Enchanted 12 before you can train frigate-related skills. Instead, you'll probably have those skills interspersed through your queue as you work your way to cruisers. Likewise, you'll train critical skills such as fitting and navigation to 5 long before you train for marauders, carriers, and possibly even hacks. All that being said, I do highly recommend that you keep your support skills up to snuff as you move into more expensive ships. Remember, this game does have a full loot death mechanic, so you don't want to be flying expensive ships with fits that are compromised with unnecessary fitting modules and crap tanking skills. As a general rule of thumb, you'll want to get your support skills to 4 and be able to sport a full T2 tank before you move on from T1 cruisers. Ship costs really start going up after that, so make sure your skills are commensurate with your ship cost. Alright, that's it for part 1. I hope to cover implants, clones, and keeping your pod safe in part 2. Until next time, don't forget to support all your favorite content creators and fly smart.